My dad told me a terrifying story about Grandma, but he didn't know half of it. Part 2. This morning, I returned to my old ways of badgering Dad. You must know more, I said. Grandma could still be causing people harm. My dad scowled. Kara, please. She'd be a very old woman by now. Even if the police never find her, she'll be gone from this world eventually. Let's just forget about all of this. I thought you'd stop asking questions if I were to finally tell you the whole story. But that's not the whole story, I thought. You must have read some of the letters she sent. Maybe she left clues, I said. I read all of them, and I took them straight to the police. She hasn't written to me in about 5 years. So just drop it, Dad pleaded. I'm sorry, Dad, but I can't get it out of my head. I keep thinking of those poor people, how they suffered. And this is coming from me. I didn't even see the photos. I don't know what things she did. It must be far worse for you. You must want to do something? Nice guilt tripping, Dad said. Yes, I do want to do something, Kara. That's exactly why I've been helping the police for years. I'm not protecting her. She may be my mother, but what she did to those people? Yeah, you're right. You don't know what she did, but I wouldn't want you to know. No human could do those things. Sorry, I sighed. That was a cruel move. I just feel horrible knowing she's out there. And like you said, I'm an adult. I make my own decisions. So, I want you to know that I'm not going to let this lie. I'm going to look for her. I expected Dad to shout at me, but he didn't. He sat thoughtfully at the kitchen table, twiddling his spoon in his cereal, and I waited patiently for a response. Yet again, he surprised me. I'll tell you something, he finally said. I perked up, leaning across the table inquisitively. The lead detective would check on us regularly, Dad continued. I kept you out of that. Doubt you remember him. But he'd keep me updated on the investigation, and he told me about the immediate connection he drew after the police finally poured through the thousands of photos. 36 victims. Every single one was brunette. Could have been a wild coincidence, but the lead detective didn't think so. Serial killers often have a pattern. I instantly shuddered. Another horrifying memory emerged from the fractured recesses of my mind. A memory that I didn't have the stomach to share with my father. Around the age of 8, I distinctly remember waking from a sleepover at my grandparents' house to find a chunk of my brunette hair missing. It had been sloppily chopped from the left side of my head during the night. I remember blaming Francesca, as she was the main prankster out of the three of us. But she blamed Sophie. Neither of them owned up to it. I got in big trouble with my parents for that one. I really hope Dad doesn't remember that, or he'd probably put 2 and 2 together. Fortunately, his memory is abysmal. And of course, I understand my granddad's insistence that I should invite Sophie and Francesca. They were both brunettes too. I had a blonde friend called Lucy who would come over to play from time to time, but the invitation was never extended to her. It all makes me feel a little bit disgusted. I doubt that helps with your investigation, Dad said. But then we're not police officers. Are we, pets? Best to leave it to the professionals. And you're not going to tell me about anything you read in the letters? I asked. You never believed this. But Grandma didn't give me any details as to her whereabouts, Kara. Dad sighed. She didn't want to be found. Then what did she write in the letters? I asked. Dad shrugged. Nothing that was ever of much use to the police, in all fairness. But I gave them the evidence anyway. She mostly requested forgiveness, and she asked questions about, well, about you, of course. About your mom, too. It made me angry when she spoke about the two of you. Maybe she was worried about us. I absent-mindedly replied, without thinking about the words that had left my mouth. Dad raised an eyebrow at me. Kara, I know she was your grandma and you loved her, but she wasn't the kind woman you believed her to be. That was a lie. A facade she maintained for decades. It's taken me many years to come to terms with that. So I understand that it might take time for you too. I just don't want you to live in denial. I nodded my head, dejected at the prospect of never having any closure. But then my dad, as he always does, dropped the biggest bombshell as an afterthought. I suppose, well, in one letter, she did write something that reminded me of my childhood. Love you, my North Angel. I miss our happy times. She used to call me that whenever we visited Gateshead. Actually, I think we all went as a family, didn't we? Dad asked. I nodded. I remembered Grandma calling me the exact same thing. Anyway, the detective contacted police in Gateshead, but nothing ever came of that lead, Dad said, shrugging. But the line was far more significant to me. Dad was forgetting something, so I excused myself and headed upstairs to the main bathroom. Sure enough, atop a forgotten shelf, there it still stood, the rather large angel of the North figurine that Grandma had bought on our holiday, a souvenir to remember happy times. She said that to all of us. Happy times. Those words were used again in the letter to Dad. It seemed a bizarre reference to make. However, after I removed the figurine, which had been untouched for more than a decade, everything made sense. A slip of paper was glued to the bottom of the ornament. It read, John, something's wrong. You should know that by the time you read this. If not, you might have stumbled upon it by accident. I suppose that would be better than it sitting unnoticed for years. Whatever the case, you need to tell the police that we're in Devon. Remember your dad's old caravan? That's where we'll be. He's leaving Lancaster soon, and I'll follow when the time's right. It's the only way he'll spare them. I can't do anything else to protect you. He's always watching. Don't let him know that you found this note. Don't say anything to him. I don't have time to write anymore. I've already spent too long here. Heart racing, I immediately crumpled the piece of paper and shoved it in my pocket. I didn't want Dad to find out. Not yet. Too much had changed. He was a broken man, and he wouldn't have been able to handle it. But this is, perhaps, one of the most perturbing pieces of the puzzle. Granddad forced Grandma to take the blame for his crimes. He threatened our safety. Even though the note dated back to 2009, I knew that I had to go to Devon. Grandma and Granddad might both be long gone, but I wasn't going to let this awfulness rest without finding out the truth for myself. And fortunately, I knew exactly where to find the caravan. That was another family holiday Dad's parents had repeated with me as a child. My father was already at work, and I took a sick day. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even Dad. I jumped into my car, set the destination, and drove for 5 brutal hours from Lancaster to Devon. When I arrived, it wasn't quite the picturesque place I remembered. The UK has been bombarded with torrential showers over the past couple of days, and the sky was painted a murky, near-colorless gray. The horizon was an endless expanse of nothingness, footed by rolling hills. And, in the midst of a mostly neglected caravan park, there stood a rusty, forlorn, static home. Granddad's caravan. Yes, it was still there. And as I clambered out of my car, a wave of all-encompassing terror descended. The realization of what I was doing. I wasn't telling stories with my dad in the comfort of our home. I wasn't reminiscing on near misses from my childhood. This was real. I was standing before the home of the bogeyman. My boots squelched in the sodden footpath leading up to the caravan's front door. Rain beat down mercilessly, but I was glad of it. The deafening sound of the downpour drowned out my footsteps. I had the element of surprise on my side, and when I reached the front door, I took several long, measured breaths before finally knocking on it. To my surprise, with a single knock, it swung open. I knew I shouldn't step inside. The lightless lair of the beast terrified me more than any of my childhood sleepovers. The knowledge of his heinous crimes of a real-life man made me fear him more than any imaginary monster. I bravely moved one foot in front of the other and crossed the threshold. Clearly nobody had stepped foot in that place for a few years, at the very least. The walls were black. No light seeped through the curtains. There were mold-covered plates in the kitchen sink, and I screamed as a rat scurried from a cupboard, disappearing somewhere into the filth of the house. "Grandma?" I called. I don't know why I announced myself. I suppose I'd already accepted that nobody could possibly be living there. I should have just called the police like Grandma suggested, I thought. But if I'd done that, I would have forfeited my one chance of finding any sort of evidence. I was tired of people hiding the truth from me. I pressed onward, flipping any light switch I could find. Nothing. Probably the result of unpaid electricity bills, another good sign that nobody had lived there for a while. Instead, I fumbled in my pocket for my phone, pulled it out, and used the flashlight. I wish I hadn't. The open-plan living area, consisting of a kitchen and 2 sofas, was spacious for a static home. It took up most of the caravan's floor area, 30 by 10 feet. Humongous. And every inch of the walls, every single inch was coated in hair. 100,000 pieces of brunette locks. Most strands were red-tinged, and the demonic decoration was knotted in a crisscross pattern, forming an intricate blanket, the interwoven pain of a nightmarish man's victims. Terrified and sickened beyond words, I bent over and hurled onto the floor, thankful, at least, to be eyeing something other than the horror which coated the walls. I quickly turned my flashlight to the corridor, which led to the back of the static home. I'd seen enough, and the sooner I could say I'd checked every inch of the caravan, the better. The bathroom was another moldy, forgotten room, hairless, thankfully. I moved towards the final room of the house, the bedroom, a room emanating a stench so powerful that I feared it more than the horror behind me. I didn't want to open the door. I really didn't. But I had to do it. Handling in my sweaty palm, I lightly pushed the door. Vomit bubbled to the top of my throat again as I found another room lined with meticulously intertwined hair that covered not only the walls but the floor, the furnishings, and every inch of the bed. Every inch of the room. But that wasn't what horrified me most. What horrified me was the hairy lump merging with the bedding. Grandma. Little more than bones. Though I only assumed that to be the case because she, too, was coated entirely in hair. There was no way of identifying the body. Still, I didn't have to get close to know she was dead, and I didn't want to do so. Grandma was interlaced with the bed's hand-woven brunette duvet, which had spread like a fungus throughout the interior of the house. I don't know whether it would have been better or worse to instead see the corpse beneath. I turned to run. But on my way out, I noticed the wardrobe door was ever so slightly ajar. It beckoned me, though I knew great horrors lay within. I had to do it, of course. It was why I traveled so far. Stepping onto the soft, hair-blanketed floor, I walked towards the wardrobe and pushed the door fully open. The catalog. Those words were printed on a slim slip of paper, which was attached to the inner door of the empty wooden wardrobe. And a new collection of photos had been glued to the back panel. Photos of me. My first day at university in Manchester, back in 2017. Photographs of me in clubs, restaurants, even a photo of me sleeping. He broke into my dorm and watched me sleep. I thought I had an empty stomach, but I surprised myself, unleashing another horror-driven stream of bile across the floor. After a few minutes of labored breathing, I collected myself and returned my gaze to the inside of the wardrobe. At least he's fixated on me, I thought, praying that he wouldn't have taken the lives of anyone else. But that wasn't true. On the inside of the other door, there was another collection of candid shots, pictures of my mother,